These criminals injured police, threw rocks at police cars and officers, burned vehicles, shut down freeways, and lobbed Molotov cocktails, all because the Trump administration was removing violent, criminal, illegal aliens from the city.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and I'm joined once again by Jeff Berkowitz of Public Affairs TV. And Jeff, that was Carolyn Leavitt, the White House press spokesman, who moments ago made that statement, and that the riots in LA, the use of military force, is one of the big issues this week that you and I will be discussing. And we'll get more into that. But Jeff, as James Carville said 30 years ago, it's the economy, stupid. And let's listen to one of the things that's happening, also breaking news this morning, was that the United States and China, our largest trading partners, seem to have had a tentative deal on trade. And earlier today, also pre-scheduled, was Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who was appearing before the House Ways and Means Committee. Let's listen to what Treasury Secretary Bessent had to say, and then we'll get back and discuss these issues in further detail.
There are 18 important trading partners that we are in fulsome negotiations with. Many of them are coming to us with unimaginably good trade deals to bring down tariffs, non-tariff trade barriers, which the academic research has shown to can be even more pernicious than the tariffs, currency manipulation, and the subsidy of labor and industry. But as these countries come to us, and I look at the list, and I think, how could this have happened? How could this have happened? That the United States willingly became party to such unfair, and unbalanced trade. And as President Trump has said, I don't blame the other countries. If you could get away with it, you should. It was those sitting behind the Resolute desk or those making trade policy who've allowed this to happen over 40 years.
So, Jeff, as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said, the United States has reached a tentative deal, and he blames, as he said there in the bite, how bad the deals were with so many of these countries that he just wonders how other administrations acquiesced to such bad deals for America. The tentative news, and because this is so breaking, I don't have a whole lot of details, but it was discussed that of the trade deal with China that is, again, tentative at this time as we tape on June the 9th, there would be the United States would charge 55% tariff on imports from China. The Chinese would have a 10% tariff on imports that they import from the United States. But the United States has agreed to allow Chinese students to stay at U.S. universities, which is something that President Trump had recently talked about ending. One last thing, again, a lot of breaking news as we were discussing here just this morning. Just came out this morning, the May CPI, Consumer Price Index, and you can see there year over year, 2.8%. That is good news in that the rate of inflation has come down quite a bit since the Biden years, and now President Trump is pushing the Federal Reserve to say, when you guys get together here, you should be lowering interest rates. We'll have to see how that goes. A lot of people say, no, that's not going to happen just yet. The Fed wants to see how some of these other trade deals go. We'll have to see what happens. But combination, at least on the economy, of tentative good news. What's your reaction, Jeff, to what's going on?
Yeah, I see it somewhat differently, Terry. The key thing here is not to lose the forest for the trees. This whole discussion, this stuff lead up to this, before with Trump on the phone with Xi, and then following up on this, the U.S. is concerned about the critical rare earth minerals that China has basically almost a monopoly on that stuff, and they were slow walking that access. We didn't want that. They've agreed to let up on the brakes on that. So that's the big deal, not the 55%, not the 10%. The other big deal is China and other countries, the European Union, are hurting the U.S. with their non-tariff trade barriers. That's not the 10%, the 55%. That's all sorts of regulations that basically prohibit us from coming into their markets, whether it's the European Union, whether it's China, whether you get the message. Okay? That's the forest. That's our problem. Not this reciprocal, oh, this should be 2.2 instead of 3.4. That's number one. The other big deal is inflation is a little higher this month than it was. And the Fed wants to be at 2%. And we're not close to 2%.
No,
when
but
we're
it's
at
come down from
2.8%.
about 9% during the Biden year.
The 9% was like 3 years ago now.
No, no,
Okay?
not that.
It was
Maybe
bad.
2.
2 years ago, two years ago. It was bad, but people, have a short memory, and now they're looking at what was it like when Trump came in, when he was inaugurated on January
Well, one
20th.
thing that's down is energy prices. The price of gasoline, you can see it at the pump, is down from where it was. I remember paying $3.50 a gallon here in the Springfield area. It's now at some stations in Springfield just below $3. So that, when you add that up, even in an economy like, you could go across the country, that is a lot more money in consumers' hands instead of going into their gas tank. And about 2/3 of the economy, U.S. economy, operates on consumer spending, which means consumers have money left over. Instead of putting that all in their gas tank, they can spend more on other items they may need. So that's all good for the economy. Let me go. Well, go ahead and make a comment. I'll follow up.
I was saying, so if you're getting at the point where Trump wanted interest rates to be lowered, which we've discussed from time to time in the last month, that argument you're making is at cross purposes, because that's saying the economy is doing well. We don't need a stimulus. We don't need lower interest rates. And I think that's the Fed chairman's point. Steady as you go. We're not lowering interest rates. We're not raising interest rates. We're just stabilizing things. That's where we are now.
I agree with that.
Okay.
If you have interest rates set where you have a stable currency, which is one of the mandates of the Fed, we don't want to devalue the American dollar through inflation. So if you have a stable currency and you have an anticipation, as many of Trump supporters on the Trump economists might argue, that in the second half of this year and into 26, the economy should be operating at a higher rate of growth, which is why President Trump is doing all the different things he's doing, then yes, the Fed might say, why should we lower interest rates, which are going to be stimulative, if you're going to have, through the other things you're doing, the Trump tariffs, the tax cut bill that's now in the Senate, if you're going to be doing those things and have the economy growing, we don't need to be cutting rates. I think one of the reasons Trump wants to get those interest rates down, because the Treasury Department has to borrow so much money because of the deficits we're running, and we're spending over $1 trillion, the federal government is, in interest payments. To bring down those interest rates even by a little bit would save billions of dollars in interest payments. I think that might be what's behind the president's argument.
The important thing to remember here is inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, as Milton Friedman, the greatest economist of the 20th century, said. So we want to make sure.
And by that he means how much money is in circulation. If you got more money in people's hands, you're more likely to have inflation, unless you increase productivity, unless you increase the amount of products that are available. The more products that are available, that keeps prices down.
Right, real GDP. If you have real GDP growing at a higher rate, not 2%, but 3 or even 4%, that allows you to be stimulative without getting inflation, because your real output is going up. We're not there yet, Terry, so we got to see what happens. We got to see if this big, beautiful bill, as Trump calls it, gets passed, and we got to see how beautiful it is. If it's more beautiful than big.
Well, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but let me insert, because right now the U.S. Senate has on their plate the bill that passed the House, the big, beautiful bill that passed the House. A lot of the senators, Republican senators, are saying, as Elon Musk said, you guys didn't cut enough in spending. And so some senators are trying to cut more. Now, House Speaker Johnson warned the Senate, we passed this in the House by one vote. If you want to make some changes, do it with a light hand, because I don't want you to make the changes that are so drastic that I'm going to lose some of the votes I need to pass the updated version back through the House, which would have to happen if the Senate makes changes, as they are likely to do. So we'll have to see what comes of that. I would remind the public, if we do not pass this bill that the president wants for continuing the tax cuts, this is what's going to happen. There's going to be an automatic tax increase in January, which is why the Republicans in both the House and Senate feel that they must get this bill passed. It is a must happen for the Republicans in Congress, and they're trying to do this by the 4th of July. We're taping this on June the 9th, so it's just like 3 weeks. This is, while we're not going to be talking about this too much other than what we just said, this is a major issue that's happening more behind the scenes this week. It'll be coming to the fore probably next week and the week after. So that's it. Any follow-up on that, or otherwise I'm going to go back to the LA riots?
Let's go to what's on people's minds as we tape this on June 11th, which is the riots that some people think may start spreading across the country. Others think maybe they've been contained to Los Angeles. So let's get into what caused these riots, and do we have a solution at bay here? Is it occurring so we don't repeat what happened in 2020?
Well,
which is riots spreading across the country.
We played the cold open of Carolyn Leavitt. I want to play another bite. This is a little longer about Carolyn Leavitt, what she said as she opened up the White House press conference, again, just about 20 minutes ago as we taped this.
But President Trump will never allow mob rule to prevail in America. The most basic duty of government is to preserve law and order, and this administration embraces that sacred responsibility. Democrats like Governor Gavin Newsome and Mayor Karen Bass shamefully failed to meet their sworn obligations to their citizens. They didn't have the courage to do the right thing and protect law-abiding Californians from rioters. That's why President Trump deployed the National Guard and mobilized Marines to end the chaos and restore law and order.
So, Carolyn Leavitt at the White House is saying that the governor and the mayor of LA failed the citizens of LA by not stepping up and protecting them, and so President Trump sent in the military. Jeff, I find it hard to believe that, we seem to have the Democratic Party in all its manifestations across the country, members of the House, members of the Senate on the Democratic side, the governor of California, the mayor of LA, seem to be arguing too much in favor of these immigrants, even in light of the fact that we have cars burning, looting going on in LA. You grew up in LA, Jeff. What are your insights on what Carolyn Leavitt had to say and how the voters across America might be reacting?
Well, yes. The important point here is that this is an 80-20 issue. 80% of the people want law and order. They also want the right to protest, but they want politicians to be able to distinguish between people who are there to protest and people who are there to riot and loot and basically destroy public safety. For the common person who's going about his or her business, who's going to work, who's going to school, who wants to move from point A to point B. This is being disrupted in Los Angeles. It may be a small part of LA, but nevertheless, LA is a big city. You don't want to be that disruptive. And so if you could trust, if the president could trust Karen Bass, the mayor, and Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, to have the courage, as he said, to maintain law and order, to encourage the police, as they could do in LA. They have a good police chief there. So the police could handle it if you don't have these disruptive forces. If these people who are there to not to protest but to loot, to set fires, set cars on fires as they were doing, you start allowing cars to be set on fire before you know it, they're setting buildings on fire. It's the broken windows theory. You've got to start respecting the law. People talk about the law and law and order.
Look, you and I are old enough to remember things, and so when we hear this stuff, we naturally put it in the context of other things that happen in our lives. I can't believe the Democrats, back when President Trump in his first term, and we had the fires going on in Kenosha, Wisconsin, we had buildings being burned, including a police department in Minnesota. And the President Trump in his first term was waiting for these governors or the mayors to say, would you send in aid, National Guard or U.S. military to protect us? He waited. Now he's not waiting. The Democrats are saying, as Gavin Newsome said last night in a speech, that the president's actions were unconstitutional. I would argue that the commander-in-chief of the United States has been calling in troops to American cities going back to the revolutionary times. And you and I can remember in 1965 the Watts riots in L.A., and they brought in the military to quell those riots. One can go on across the country. Ike nationalized the Arkansas National Guard to protect the Little Rock 7 when they were trying to integrate the schools. John F. Kennedy called in and did the same thing when George Wallace was trying to keep blacks from entering the University of Alabama. The use by the President of the United States to quell riots is long established. So I think the Democrats can make these arguments, but anyone who's followed any news, and if it's going to be legally challenged, the Democrats are going to lose on the idea that the president needs to have an invitation sent to them by the mayors or the governors.
Right. This is something that one would hope people would be responsible, that Governor Newsom would be responsible. I think people are pointing out his eye is more on TikTok and how many views he's getting of a speech he's making than it is on what's his obligation to the people of California and the rest of the country to do the right thing. So that, we've made it extremely difficult for ICE to do its job. It's there for immigration control and enforcement. The president spoke during the campaign of prioritizing, that President Trump spoke during the campaign of prioritizing not just people who've come across the border illegally, which is a crime, but people who've come across the border and then engaged in murder and rape and gang activities and so forth. But to do that, he needs ICE and he needs cooperation of the local jails to say, we have people here, and yes, you can come in and you can detain them here and you can apprehend them here. And those things have been refused to let ICE take control, to the tune of something like 13,000 refusals of the LA jails to ICE. In Illinois, it's bad, but it's only 3,000 refusals. In New York, it's actually bad, but it's down to I think 900. My point is, you need a cooperative activity between the President of the United States, the governor, and the mayor of various cities where these disruptions occur.
And typically,
we're not getting that.
We almost always had that. We didn't when I mentioned when you had Southern segregationists fighting the federal government against integrating schools. There, they were not cooperative, which is why Eisenhower nationalized or federalized, I should say, the Arkansas National Guard. But now, ironically, you've got Democrats almost making the same argument as what the segregationist governors were making 70 or 65 years ago, only they're defending what are clearly many of these, not all, but many people who are engaging in criminal activities.
Right. Well, this is now a matter in the federal courts, or will be tomorrow. And the law says on this relevant aspect as to whether the president can do or not do the National Guard, it says the governor shall, under certain circumstances, call out the National Guard.
Which is to say you must do it.
Right. Well,
It's
and we'll
not
see
an option.
that, presumably what
Look,
the courts will say that,
there
I
are
think.
states, including Illinois, which and the city of Chicago, which say they are sanctuary states, sanctuary cities. I have always argued that that's illegal. You can't decide as a governor or a mayor that you're not going to
Right.
follow federal law. And tomorrow, on Thursday, as we tape this tomorrow, Governor Pritzker will be one of the governors appearing before a congressional hearing on sanctuary cities. We will have to see what the governor has to say. I can presume what he's going to say. But, you know, in a broader context, Jeff, I think we are experiencing this week some of the key issues that will be coming up in the 2026 midterms. And the question is on law and order and who's for the law and order, who are taking the steps to preserve safety, and who are not. And by the way, credit again to Senator Fetterman of Pennsylvania, the Democrat senator, who spoke up and said, my party, the Democratic Party, is wrong on this. These are clearly criminal actions happening, and we're on the wrong side of that issue.
Well, we're in the perpetual campaign now. We thought recently we extended it so it was a 2-year national campaign for president. Now we're saying it's apparently a
It never
4-year
ends, right?
national campaign for president.
But let me
So it's
ask
not
you,
2020.
why are the
Terry,
Democrats so tone
Terry,
deaf
excuse me,
on
let me
this
say-
issue?
Before we answer that question, let me just point out, you just said 2026 midterms, but I'm emphasizing here the 2028 Democratic presidential primary.
I
for the
agree. I think it's
presidential
going to
election.
cary over. And I think
just
that, would
no,
you agree with me that the Democrats are just tone deaf on this issue and are on the wrong side for their political benefit? They're arguing the wrong side of this.
Well, they are, but let's see what happens tomorrow when J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, goes before the Oversight Committee of the U.S. House, Government and Reform and Oversight, and he'll be there. He's been spending weeks on this, getting ready for this, going to major law firms. People often thought Covington and Burling was a old line Republican law firm. Not so much, as they're heavily involved in his preparation. The amount of money he's spending, he's saying he's spending his own money, not on the Illinois money. But it's a lot of money he's spending, a lot of time, because he wants to strike. Maybe he'll back off from his more radical tone of the last few months. Maybe because and remember, Rahm Emanuel now is in the Democratic primary for the presidential race.
Yeah, we
in
got to have two
2028.
Chicagoans, right? Rahm Emanuel and Pritzker.
Rahm is trying
That might
to,
be
I
seeking the
think
Democratic
Rahm is trying
presidential
to,
nomination.
he's trying to get in the centrist lane. We'll see if Pritzker wants to join him in the centrist lane or stay in the left lane, the left wing lane of Gavin Newsom.
My bet is that
and
Governor
Karen Bass.
Pritzker is going to double down and stay on the left, that he won't try to take the centrist line. I think he thinks that he is more likely to get the nomination if he appears to be the one standing up against President Trump. I would argue that that would be a mistake. But Jeff, let me move along here to something related. We're not moving away from the topic, but one of the things, and also with the Democrats where I think are on the wrong side of the political argument, we had Elon Musk with Doge uncover all sorts of wasteful spending earlier this year. And one of the things that came out when you look at USAID, that there were billions of dollars being funneled through USAID to what they call NGOs. That stands for non-government organization. Basically, it's just these are nonprofits that were set up for various purposes. Recently, the Illinois Channel recorded a hearing in the House, of the House Oversight Subcommittee, where the chairman, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, was saying how these nonprofit organizations that were getting these billions of dollars funded to them were facilitating. It wasn't just that people were illegally crossing the border. These taxpayer-funded nonprofits were facilitating the entry of illegals, including criminals, into the United States. So let's hear that and we'll talk about it.
Under the guise of assisting migrants, these groups have placed criminal networks, dangerous gangs, and human traffickers into American towns and cities. Think about this. The American people's hard-earned taxpayer dollars have been used to literally import rapists, murderers, and terrorists from around the world straight into our communities.
So there you go. Again, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, what's your reaction?
Well, as I've said recently, the Republican Party and MTG have to be more surgical. She's making a point that has some validity, but when you say NGOs or when you say not-for-profits, there are a number of not-for-profits that are good in this country and are doing good, especially local work, state work. And you want to distinguish them from the situation where people are told not to believe their lying eyes. When you look at these riots, those aren't NGOs that I think, they're not Illinois, that's not the state councils of the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, these 50 humanities councils across the country. I don't think they're doing these things that she's talking about. So you don't want to cut those funds. But there's somehow money that's coming to people. Follow the money, as we learned to say in Watergate. When you watch these in LA, it's being televised. The riots are being televised as we watch. And you see people being handed tools to start chopping up the cement so they can have the equivalent of bricks and concrete to throw at their police, the LA police, local police, to throw at the National Guard. Boy, they're saying, oh no, these are just protesters. No, those are just looters and rioters. And she ought to be identifying that when she just says NGOs, that could be missing the point. This is the moment. The moment is focus on the riots. And people are not focusing on looters and rioters, and they're confusing them with protesters. And people have to make these nuanced distinctions if they want to get public policy right.
You know, another Democrat that just spoke out, Democrat from LA, Representative Maxine Waters, and she was saying it's not like these protesters were engaged in criminal activities. Jeff, the video tells the story. And when you see destroyed police cars, when you see other cars being burnt on fire, you see the looters, the American people are going to see this with their own eyes, that what Maxine Waters is saying is wrong. And I just think that I can't understand why it seems almost the totality of the Democrats in the Congress are on the wrong side of this issue. President Trump had a press conference yesterday and was asked, you sent in the National Guard, what about, are you going to continue this in other cities? And he affirmed that if that happens in other cities, he would stand by and do the same.
These are criminals. People are criminals that allowed these criminals into our country. And I don't think that Biden knew what the hell he was doing. I don't think he even knew about it. But when they opened up our borders for the whole world to come in, yeah, we're going to get them out. We're getting them out. We're starting to get acknowledgement from the courts that, you know, is a system. They come in without courts and they go out, they want trials and everything else. I think that's starting to work out now. Judges are starting to see what a terrible situation it is. Many of those people that you saw on television last night are criminals that were allowed into our country by Biden.
Well, you are the Illinois Channel. I am Public Affairs TV, but we're local. And yesterday, June 10th, the disruption started coming to Chicago and Illinois. So we'll see where the governor is as he's speaking in DC. He's out of state. Is he focused on when do we do something here, or do we let the disruptions grow into cars being on fire, buildings being on fire? When does he act to show some courage as the governor of the state of Illinois? Trump has made where he stands clear to the country.
It's going to be clear. We're going to have to see what happens. But folks, give us your comments. We appreciate it. Give us a thumb up if you would. And Jeff and I will continue to follow these stories and others as they develop. But Jeff, for now, we'll have to say goodbye.
Goodbye.